Okay, so in this lecture, we are going to continue talking about our special senses. So if you recall, in previous lectures, we've discussed general senses. We then talked about the eye and our special sense of vision in the previous lecture. And so in this lecture, we're going to talk about our special sense of hearing, so audition. We're also going to talk about our sense of balance or equilibrium. And we're also going to talk a little bit about our sense of smell and our sense of taste as well. So we're going to start off focusing on the senses that arise from our ear, or that are accomplished via the workings of our ear. And so this will be our special sense of hearing, so audition, as well as our special sense of equilibrium or balance. Okay. So we'll start off by talking about hearing. All right. So whenever we look at our ear anatomically, there are specific regions to the ear. So very generally, right, we typically think of the ear as just the external part of the ear that we can see on the side of our head, right? And that, in reality, that is one very, very small part of our ear. Okay, and it's essentially the least complex. It's the least complicated part of our ear, if you want to think of it like that. So our ear, we really have three parts to our ear, all right, or three regions to our ear, all right. So we have a region known as the external or outer ear. We have a region known as the middle ear, and we have a region known as the inner ear, all right. So the external ear is everything from this auricle, or what's sometimes known as the pinna, or what we think of as this kind of ear flap out here, all the way to our tympanic membrane, or what we generally refer to as our eardrum, right? So everything from there, from the auricle to the tympanic membrane and everything in between, that is considered our external ear. So even this external acoustic meatus or external auditory meatus, this is our ear canal. This is considered part of our external ear, even though we generally think of that as kind of a more internal part of our ear, because we have to stick our finger, into the ear in order to get to that point. So auricle or pinna, external acoustic meatus or the auditory meatus or the ear canal, and the tympanic membrane, all of this is really considered part of our external ear. So you could also think of the tympanic membrane or our eardrum as being the dividing point or the landmark that divides our external ear from what's known as our middle ear, right? So if we go here now, everything from this point to this point here, this is all middle ear. So the middle ear is going to be composed of a couple of bones. It's the three smallest bones in our body, known as the ossicles. And these are going to be the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. And we'll talk about these in more detail in just a little while. The middle ear is also connected to our nasopharynx via a tube known as the eustachian tube, or sometimes called the auditory tube, and it's sometimes also referred to as the pharyngotympanic tube. Okay, but it is this long, slender tube you see here, and it extends down into the nasopharynx, and then inferiorly we would get down to the oral cavity down here. Okay, so that is our middle ear, and then we have our inner ear. Right, so our inner ear is all of this structure here. And this is where the actual kind of hearing process occurs and the balance occurs with a couple of things. One known as our cochlea, right here. This has to do with hearing, right? So our special sense of hearing. And then we have these regions up here known as the semicircular canals and the vestibule. These are largely going to be involved with our sense of balance, okay? So we'll look at these in more detail as we get to them in this lecture. Okay. So one important thing about sound is that sound cannot travel in a vacuum. Okay. So in order for sound to move, there has to be some particle that carries that sound wave, right? So if in a vacuum there's no particle, so there's nothing to carry sound waves. So this is one important thing when we're discussing this idea of sound and this idea of our special sense of hearing. Okay. So again, as we look at the ear, we can see these various locations. So when we look at the outer ear, we see the auricle. We also see the external acoustic meatus or the external auditory meatus or the ear canal. And these are the main components of what is known as our outer ear or our external ear. All right. Now, we know that running in our ear canal, we can have something known as cerumen. And the cerumen is the $10 word for earwax, right? So cerumen is, it serves a couple of functions. One, it serves to kind of protect the ear canal. It also has antimicrobial properties that prevent the growth and proliferation of microbes. So it is a very beneficial thing. It's produced normally through ceruminous glands, which are a kind of modified sweat gland, if you will. And as we said, cerumen is normally good. However, if it builds up, then it can obviously impair our sense of hearing, right? So if we had lots of cerumen build up in this ear canal, then any sound waves that are coming in are going to be hitting that cerumen and being deflecting backwards, right? So you want it to reach this tympanic membrane in order for us to actually be able to hear it. And so if we have a buildup of earwax or cerumen, then it can impair that, all right? So one important thing about this idea of earwax and cerumen is that, as we just said, it's normal, right? Normally, we don't need to ourselves go in and remove it, right? Now, there have been all these devices and tools and whatnot that have been created for us to do that. And a common one that we typically think of are things like Q-tips, right? So Q-tips, we all stick them in our ear, and we try to clean our ear. Now we try to get earwax out and whatnot. But really what ends up happening is as we push the Q-tip in, what we normally do is we just push the earwax further in, right? We push the cerumen further into our further into our ear canal towards our tympanic membrane. And over time, if this is done frequently, you can actually get a buildup of that cerumen in your ear, and then you have new complications, right? So as a rule of thumb, you should put nothing in your ear smaller than your elbow, right? So think about that. Your elbow, you can't fit your elbow in your ear, so that tells you that you should put nothing in your ear, right, ordinarily. Now, there would obviously be some exceptions if you had to have, impacted earwax removed or something, but generally there's no real need for us to be sticking Q-tips, sticking anything into our ear in order to remove anything that's in there, okay? So when we look at our ear, the main connection from the outer ear, or our external ear, to our middle ear is this tympanic membrane, or our eardrum, right? So the purpose of the tympanic membrane is to translate or to change sound waves through the ear that's coming from the environment, through the auricle, through the external acoustic meatus, change those sound waves into mechanical pressure waves, right? So we're going to take these sound waves coming in, and you notice that now in the middle ear we have our tympanic membrane and we have our ossicles, and they are physically moving, right? They're physically vibrating as sound is hitting them. So what we'll see is as sound comes in, it's going to strike the tympanic membrane, it's going to deflect the tympanic membrane, and as it deflects and moves, it's going to move the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, and then that's going to transmit that signal to our cochlea, where we actually have our hearing kind of cascade of events occur, and then the signal will be sent to the brain, okay? So the big thing with the tympanic membrane is it is transferring the sound waves to the ossicles. We're going from sound waves, and we're converting that into mechanical pressure waves that are moving within the middle ear, all right? So we can see this here as well, as sound waves would come in, hit the tympanic membrane, move our ossicles. All right, so once we have gone past the tympanic membrane, we get into the region of our ear known as the middle ear, right? So the middle ear is deep within our skull. It's actually kind of contained within this middle ear, and our external, or our middle ear and our inner ear are contained within our temporal bone, all right? So if you recall, if you remember and recall the axial skeleton, we looked at the temporal bone. There is a region of the temporal bone, when you look at it from an internal view looking inside the skull cavity, a region known as the petrous region, or the petrous portion of the temporal bone. Within that, so that term petrous meant rock-like, so within that rock-like structure of the temporal bone is where you find this middle ear and this inner ear region, right? So again, it's within the temporal bone. It is separated from the external ear via the tympanic membrane, all right? So in our middle ear we have the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. We have the pharyngotympanic tube, or the auditory tube, or the eustachian tube. And connecting from the middle ear to our inner ear are two small, what are known as windows, all right? And these windows are called the round window and the oval window. All right. So the oval window is going to be what the stapes pushes against after the tympanic membrane is vibrated. It moves the malleus into the stapes. The stapes is going to push on this oval window, which is then going to transfer those waves into the cochlea here. All right. Now the round window almost acts as a pressure relief valve or a pressure relief window. But as we're pushing on the oval window, and there's fluid within this cochlea, as we're pushing the oval window, it's pushing fluid, and the pressure of this fluid needs to be relieved somehow, and so it bulges out this round window. Okay, and this will make much more sense whenever we look at a section through the cochlea a little bit closer. Okay, all right. We also mentioned this pharyngotympanic tube. So as it provides a connection between the nasopharynx, which would be right down in this region here, in the oral cavity, a little bit more inferior, and the external ear or middle ear here. So this pharyngotympanic tube, it also provides a passageway from the nasopharynx to the middle ear cavity that can be a route for infections and microorganisms to spread. And so when you think of things like ear infections, these typically happen in younger children or infants, right? And it's because the actual structure of the ear, the middle ear and this eustachian tube, it actually changes over time, all right? So it turns out that during infancy and childhood, the angle between the middle ear and the nasal cavity, or the middle ear and the nasopharynx, is more straight. There's not as great of an angle, so it's more horizontal. So you can see this right here. This is more horizontally located, whereas in an adult, it's slightly more vertically oriented, right? So what this means is that in childhood, any infection or microorganism that may be in the nasal cavity or oral cavity can travel relatively easily into the middle ear, right? However, in adulthood, it's harder because these things would need to go against gravity, going up toward that middle ear. So this is why ear infections are less common in adults and more common in young children and infants. Okay, so you can develop ear infections. This is sometimes referred to as otitis media. Okay, so this otitis media is an infection of the middle ear. All right. Now, you also, and if you've ever been on a plane, you've experienced this. You manipulate your eustachian tube in an attempt to equalize the pressure between your external environment and your middle ear, right? And so what you have happen is as you're ascending in an airplane, right, as you're going up, the pressure changes in your environment and your middle ear, and they're not equal, okay? So what you have happen, and what you typically do on a plane, is you move your jaw, right? You move your jaw, you chew gum, you yawn, you do something that acts to pull on this eustachian tube, kind of pull it down maybe this way, kind of pull it up this way, and allow the air in your environment, so maybe from your oral cavity or something, to rush up that eustachian tube into the middle ear and equalize it, right? And so the high pressure here can equalize it between the middle ear and the nasopharynx and the oral cavity, and that helps to relieve that discomfort and that irritation that you get as you are ascending or descending in a plane, right? So here, these images off to the right are showing the changes in the pressure within the ear during descent. And so you can test this for yourself very easily next time you are on a plane and you're ascending and you're descending. You'll likely feel those pressure differences in your ear, and so you can move your jaw, move your mouth to help equalize those pressures. All right. So when we look in the middle ear specifically, we see these accessory structures, so these bones here. And these are called the auditory ossicles, and these are the smallest bones in the body. Okay. So we have one known as the malleus, one known as the incus, one known as the stapes. So the malleus we'll start with. This is the first one. So this is the one I'm going to circle right here in red. This is the malleus. The term malleus means hammer, hammer-like. Okay. So the early anatomists that named this thought that it looked like a hammer, and so they called it the malleus. It is attached to, there's a little extension that attaches to the tympanic membrane, and then there is also a joint between the malleus and our next one, which is known as the incus, right? So the term incus means anvil. So this small ossicle resembled an anvil to the early anatomists, and this is the middle bone. So that is this one right here. Let me highlight it in a different color. That is going to be this one that we see right here in green, right? So this is our incus. And then lastly, we have our stapes, okay? The term stapes means saddle, and this one, in my opinion, looks most like its name. It actually kind of looks like a, I'm sorry, it doesn't mean saddle, it means stirrup, okay? It actually kind of resembles a stirrup, and if you look at it here, highlighted or circled in blue, it kind of looks like a stirrup that you would find on a saddle, okay? So the foot plate of the stapes pushes against that oval window that we mentioned a few slides ago, right? So this point right here, that is the oval window that leads into the inner ear cavity, which would be right over here, right? So as the tympanic membrane moves, it moves the malleus, it moves the incus, it moves the stapes, and that foot plate of the stapes, which if we show it right here, the foot plate of the stapes is this kind of flat region that you see right here. So that is the foot plate of the stapes. As it pushes, it's going to push and distort the fluid that is on the other side of this and send pressure waves of the fluid through the cochlea. All right. So the ossicles transfer the vibration from the external ear, the sound wave, from the tympanic membrane onto that oval window, and then those pressure waves of fluid flow throughout the inner ear. Now there are a few muscles in this area. One of the muscles is known as the tensor tympani, and there's another one known as the stapedius. And these are largely thought to be involved with kind of preventing excess movement of the tympanic membrane and preventing excess movement of the stapes to help protect our ear in the event of extremely loud stimuli. So in the presence of very large sound waves, this tensor tympani, which attaches to the tympanic membrane here, and then you have your stapedius, which you see right here. This is going to help to pull and dampen the sound waves to prevent damage to our internal ear. All right, so it's a protective mechanism. So when you look at your stapes on a dime, you can see exactly how small they are, right? So whenever we look at these, this one here, so if we go back here, we can see these right here. So here we're going to have the malleus right here. We're going to have the incus, which is that anvil, and then we're going to have the stirrup or the stapes right here. Okay, so you can see exactly how small they are. They're extremely, extremely tiny. And again, you find these within the petrous region or that petrous portion of the temporal bone. All right. So we're going to stop here, and we'll pick up with the next part, talking about some of the mechanics of sound and how we actually hear. And we'll get into the physiology of hearing as well.